So Bruce had just asked last week if I would maybe share this morning. So sort of been thinking about this all week. It's been, it's what it's like when your weeks are a bit crazy. How many of you feel like your weeks are crazy, like your life's a bit crazy at the moment? Yeah, I sort of feel that so much. There's so many demands, that are on our time, and sometimes it's demands that are on us, and then sometimes we're not the best at managing those and prioritizing things and everything. And just sometimes it just seems that we live in a state of survival, and yet God meets us there in the midst of it. I know we had. It's funny. I have this weird thing that happens to me whenever I get overwhelmed, or whenever I get nervous, or whether I get anxious, and it often happens, particularly related to coming up to camp, and it also relates to when I have to speak. Yesterday we had things at camp are just very hectic at the moment with projects we're trying to do. We had a big work bee that was out at camp, which should be a blessing. Like, there's a group of young adults in Vanderhoof, and each year they come together for a weekend. They come out to camp. They want to tackle a whole bunch of projects. And but in just trying to organize those things, he just felt this massive stress. And so how it works with me is I usually end up in the morning, I start coughing, and then I start dry heaving. And it's this regular thing, but it's a weird one because I can't change. I went to the doctor about it, to see, is there something medical that's kind of going on? And he said, well, it's really a distress. You should maybe see a counsellor. I said, I have one. But that doesn't seem to help. It just seems to be part of the reality, or part of the cross. And so that was the same this morning, as I got up to share, that I got up to sort of think the idea of speaking, and the idea of things, the way my brain works and the way my world just seems to be at the moment. Like, nothing seems smooth, nothing seems organized, nothing seems ordered, and yet it seems God just still asks you to just keep pressing on and trusting. And the songs we sang this morning were very heartfelt for me. It's this recognition of dependence and need on Jesus, and so where I've sort of felt led to this morning, I have some questions just for you, just to ponder for a moment. Where is God in your life at the moment? Just ponder that just for a moment. Where is God in your life at the moment? Am I prioritizing His will in my life, or my own? Am I experiencing joy? What is getting in the way of my relationship with Him? I've been asking myself those questions this week, and because I find that sometimes whenever I'm looking at my life and what's going on in my life and how I'm coping with my life, and it seems recently God has brought me back to a simple passage of Scripture to see what place does that passage of Scripture have in my life related to everything else that I'm experiencing. And so I just want to read Matthew 22, verses 34 to 40. And it says, "But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees," these two religious groups that were around in Jesus' time, they gathered together. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him and saying, "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." It seems sometimes in our lives we need things to be simplified and made simple. You know, we need a place to come back to continually in our lives to sort of see where are things at the moment in my life? Where am I at with things that are going on around? And it seems here, Jesus says very clearly, he said, in terms of the law, in terms of God's purposes, in terms of our satisfaction, he said, this is the greatest commandment. This is the greatest thing that God gives to us as his people. This is the thing. This is the key thing. This is the foundational thing. This is the thing that will give fulfillment and satisfaction in our lives. And he says it's love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the second one, how we relate to others. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And so I've been thinking about this, and this has kind of been this go-to thing. Whenever there's things that I'm struggling with in my life, whenever there's things that I'm unhappy about in my life, whenever there's things that I want to complain about in my life, it seems God, Jesus, is gently bringing me back to this passage, to this reminder. Where he said, the essence of your life, Steve, the satisfaction in your life, the fulfillment in your life, has to be rooted and centered and found right here in me. He said, this is where the joy will be found. It's called the greatest commandment. And so sometimes, we've thought, well, that's someone telling us something that we have to do. And I kind of thought about that word commandment because it seems to come along the lines of, like a commander, someone in authority, someone who is responsible, and it's something that in a military situation, it's something that they give to their troops, and it's a thing of safety, it's a thing of authority, it's a thing of protection, it's a thing of what they're giving to their people, and here in terms of from God to us, it's that thing where he's saying it isn't this thing of God on high looking down at people and with this thing of you must love me. You must love me with everything that you have. Because we know how that goes. It's like love cannot be forced. We can be commanded to love, but our hearts will never respond in love. We have to be wooed. We have to have love shown to us. We have to have the tender intimacy, that comes from our Father. So it seems there's a dual-fold thing where God is saying, do you know what? This aspect of loving me, he said, yes, I am God, and you are my creation, and you are my children, and it's the way that I've made it. He said, this is where the center part and the satisfaction in our lives will come from. You loving me because I am God, but because I am God. I had this other question. How do we see God? Do we see God as a distant dictator type? Or do we see God as an intimate Father? And because if we see God as a distant, sort of like powerful, maybe kind of like dictator type person, then that call to loving him will always be met with the same. A lack of desire, a lack of willingness, lack of all of those things. And yet we know that God shows us his love towards us in his Son. It's interesting. I was reading a portion in John, where he's talking about the Father, and the disciples, they're sort of going, okay, show us the Father then, show us the Father. And he's saying, have I been with you this long? Do you not see me? He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. If you've seen me in the way that I've interacted, you've seen the Father, you've seen his love. And then that the biggest part of God's love that we witness and we experience is what we've just sort of celebrated at Easter. with the sending and the sacrifice of his son. It's like the demonstration of his love. And so in a way, it's like that aspect. If we grab a hold of our sin and we recognize our sin, and we really see God's heart in not wanting to leave us there and to free us and redeem us and draw us to himself and bring us into intimacy, the idea of a dictator and a separate father, it's not there. It can't be there. The only way it can be there is if we don't really recognize our own sin, because then we really think, well, I don't really need any of that. So the whole thing is kind of like a little bit more removed from my reality, and it's a little bit more distant. But whenever that's revealed to us and we're really laid open and we're broken, Rachel was talking about an aspect of just brokenness, realizing, it's like where I'm at and the things that have kind of got a little askew and things like that. And we recognize our sin and we recognize that need. And yet then we see when we come to God and see he's an intimate father who meets us and draws us to himself. It's like it's that love that wants to compel us to himself. It's a love that wants to compel. And so it's interesting that here we can recognize, it's nearly like undeniable. If we're looking at this, we're sort of saying, like God has specifically said, the greatest commandment is to love me with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and to love your neighbors as yourself. It's given to us that's the reality, that's the truth, that's his word. So then it's how do we, in our frail lives, how do we respond to this? How does this work out in our lives? And there's a couple of little passages where I just want us to look at to see where it sort of works out in Simon Peter's life. If we have a little look with his disciples, disciples who spent the most amount of time with Jesus, who knew him the most intimately, who maybe didn't still get what he was saying until later on, until after his resurrection, where things started to begin to click. Because I don't know, like when you think of that, like when you look at that whole thing, okay, this is God's command that I love him, with everything. All my heart, all my soul, placing his will ahead of my will, his desires ahead of my desires. Man, that is just like a big, big, big task. I'm not sure if I've ever done that maybe, or maybe I try, but it just never goes so well. And so you have Peter here, and in Matthew 26, verse 30 to 35. We have this little passage. He's with his disciples, and he's trying to prepare them for what's to come, and he's trying to let them know, what's going to be happening. Fully aware of the crucifixion and being handed over and being betrayed and all of these things. It says here, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, all of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee. And Peter answered and said to him, even if all are made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble. I'm your man. And Jesus said to him, assuredly I say to you that this night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said to him, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And so said all the disciples. And in one of the other passages I sort of liked as they described it, it said, and Peter even more vehemently, even with more adamance, more, sort of like passion said, even if they all do, I won't. I'm your person. And I'm thinking, as Peter was thinking about that first commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And here in a situation, where he's wanting to declare his loyalty and his love to Jesus, but not aware of his own heart, not aware of his own weakness. And here with such adamance and sort of saying, no, Jesus, I won't deny you. I won't betray you. I will go with you for everything. And so a few verses later, a little bit of time passes. Jesus is taken away by the soldiers. And Peter's in this courtyard by himself, feeling a little bit lost. And we read, "Now Peter sat outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him saying, 'You also were with Jesus of Galilee.' But he denied it before them all, saying, 'I don't know what you're saying.' And when he had gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, 'This fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth.' But again he had denied with an oath, 'I do not know that man.' And a little later, those who stood by came up and said to Peter, 'Surely you also are one of them, for your speech betrays you.' Then he began to curse and swear, saying, 'I do not know the man.' Immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the words of Jesus, who had said to him, 'Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times.' So he went out and wept bitterly." I wonder, as we think about our own lives, our own attitudes, our own heart towards the call of Jesus, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, how our heart responds to that. When we look honestly at our own lives, we look honestly at the priorities that we make, how that responds to our heart. Here, it seems Peter is faced with a touch of reality. He's thinking, this is what I wanted. But what's come out here is something that is abhorrent. That is causing mourning. He said, "I didn't even think I had this in me. I thought I was going to be with Jesus. I thought I was going to be that person. I thought I was going to be up there, loving him, prioritizing him, following him, putting him first in everything." And yet here, when a little bit of pressure is put up, everything else falls apart and the core of the heart is revealed. And there's brokenness and there's grieving that's there. We know from reading in the things that have sort of passed, as things sort of like settle down and Jesus has been crucified and the whole thing with the grave has happened and now he's not here anymore, and the disciples are just wondering, like, what are we doing now? It's like the person that we followed, they're kind of gone, and so they just go back to what was familiar to them. They just go back to fishing and they go back to their nets. And we see there's this very interesting passage of Jesus coming alongside them at the end of the book of John, in John chapter 21. And I find it very encouraging. And so you have this passage initially where, Jesus comes and meets the fishermen. They've decided that they're going fishing. And they don't actually recognize that it's him. And we'll read this. We'll just read this little passage. And Jesus came to them, and actually we'll read that a little bit before here. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." And they said to him, "We're going with you also." So they went out and immediately got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. But when the morning had now come, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Then Jesus said to them, "Children, have you any food?" And they answered him, "No." And he said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast, and now they were not able to draw in because of the multitude of fish. Therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved, John, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put out his outer garment, for he had removed it, and plunged into the sea. But the other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far away from land, but about 200 cubits, dragging the net with fish. 200 cubits, I think, is about 100 meters. Then as soon as they had come to land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid on it, and bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish which you have just caught." Simon Peter went up and dragged the net to land, full of large fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not broken. And Jesus said to them, "Come and eat breakfast." Yet none of the disciples dared, asking him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and likewise the fish. This is now the third time Jesus showed himself to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. This next little passage is something that is so interesting. And first off, it's one of those interesting things whenever we think of the word love. we just tend to think of, there's just the word love. We just use that word love. It seems like if we were reading this passage in the language that it was written, it wouldn't just be using the word love. It says they have at least 3 words that describe love. There's the word agape, which relates to the love of God, the love that's in the law, the love that says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, the love that God has, the unconditional love. There's that love. And then, there's just a friendly sort of like love, the love of friends, the kind of like you love. That's phileo. And then there's the love more related to intimacy and relationship and marriage and things like that eros love. And so here it says, so when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? And it doesn't specifically say what he meant by these, whether he meant the other disciples, whether he meant the fishing. And I don't know what he was meaning specifically related to that, but it was something there that Jesus knew had captivated, that was a draw for Simon Peter. It was something that he was drawn to, that was important to him, that was maybe something where he got a lot of security and safety and things like that from. And here Jesus is saying, he's saying, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? And he said to them, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And here it's Jesus is saying, Simon Peter, do you agape me? Do you agape me? Do you love me the way that the commandment says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength? And Simon Peter, knowing his heart, recognizing the journey that he's come through, he says, yes, Lord, you know that I like you. I phileo you. In my heart, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not there. I've kind of proven that. I like you, but I'm not there. Full abandonment. I'm not there. And then Jesus says to him, he said, feed my lambs. And he said to him a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you agape me? And he says to him, yes, Lord, you know that I phileo you. I like you. And Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. And he said to him a third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Do you phileo me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you phileo me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I phileo you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. And at times that passage has confused me quite a lot with it. But it seems that the meaning that I see from this is I see Jesus coming alongside and knowing, yes, this is the law. He says, this is the law. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. That is the truth. That is the place where we want to keep coming back to. That is the place where we want our hearts to be led to. Where we want it led to, where we're prioritizing God's will in our life. Where we're asking him, what is it that you want me to do? How is it that you want me to live? Where are you in this circumstance? Where are you in this situation? And that's still where he's wanting to bring us to draw us to. And yet, in the recognition of our own weakness, here we sort of see Simon Peter saying, do you know what, Lord? He says, I'd like to be there, but I recognize my own heart. He says, I'm not there. There's stuff that's in the way. There's blockages that are there, but I like you. I like you. But I want to agape you. But I only phileo you. And it seems that in the midst of that, Jesus kind of going, oh, well, maybe next time we can improve a little bit better and then I'll have something for you to do. It's like he meets him there and he says these three things. He says, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. It seems that, it's like he recognizes the weaknesses that are in our own hearts. And he wants us to come to that place of honesty before him where we're being drawn to that verse. We're being drawn to that truth. We're being drawn to the greatest commandment that says, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Prioritizing him. letting the things in our lives go through that filter, our decision-making, where we're letting our decision-making come through and saying, not my will, but what's your will, Lord? What would you have me do in this situation? How would you have me act in this? How would you have me spend my time in this? Would you have me go and visit those people? I don't really want to visit those people. I want to do some of my own stuff. I got like gardening stuff that needs to happen, and I got my own stuff to do. It's like having our lives come through that lens where we're trying to open things up and sort of say, do you know what? I'm recognizing what I want to do. But what is it that you want me to do? I want to arrive at that place. And here it seems that in the midst of that, Jesus is not looking for perfection. He's not looking for us to get it all together. He's just looking for us being open and honest and aware of where we're at in the current situation. And he's saying, you know what? I've got purpose for you right where you're at. He said, I've got things for you to do. I got stuff for you to do related to my kingdom. I've got people that I want you to bless. I've got people that I want you to go alongside and encourage. He said, I've got things for you to do. He said, the priority, the goal is, yes, we're wanting you to be drawn to this thing, where I am that person, where those things in your life are going through the filter, where we're wanting his will to be our will. But in the journey of trying to arrive there, and maybe we never arrive there, but we're continually at that place of honesty of saying, Lord, there's things in the way. What we saw in Rachel's sharing and testimony this morning was that very thing. It was that recognition of things, that have come into my life, that have become priorities, that have become things that I'm going to for satisfaction. And yet in the recognition of those things, there's like a mourning of that, and I say, I don't want to remain here. There's no satisfaction here. There's no joy here. There's not going to be fulfillment here. I want to get back to that. I want to lay those things aside, and I want to come back to that place of intimacy with God, prioritizing him, letting him have that place in my life. A couple of things just in closing. Quite recently, there I met a young man who I'd known quite a bit whenever I was younger, and he had got married maybe about 9 months ago, and he was young and she was young, and there was a lot of warning signs. There was a lot of things there that you were just sort of thinking, man, this just does not seem like a good thing in terms of where the girl was at in her life, and just different things like that there. And yet, there's often when you're in the midst of those things, you have your mind set in one place. And that's just, no, this is what I want. This is feeling good. This is maybe first love. This is what I want. Don't distract me with anything else. This is what I want, and I'm going for it. And I'd asked him, I said, how's married life? He said, Steve, he said, 5 months ago, she left me. I said, how long are you married for? He said, 3 months. And he's just broken. And to me, it was nearly like this picture, of, and we get it, whenever we're parents too, for our children, that desire that we have for them in the choices that they make. And you sort of see that for God too, like the desires that he has for us, in the choices that we make, and just longing for us, seeing the bigger picture and longing for us to just surrender and say, will you let me be in charge? Will you let your decision-making come through the process, come through the filter of my will and what I have? Will you trust me that what I have for you is blessed? If what I have for you is what you need, if what I have for you is what will satisfy. And I saw that picture that's there, because often, that in a different set of circumstances, that young man is me. That young man is all of us. But it's that same thing of trying to come back to that place of recognizing the heart of God in the midst of those things. And realizing that place of surrender, that place of giving up our will, that place of giving over to him, that's the place of safety. That's the place of fulfillment. That's the place of satisfaction. One, because it is the greatest commandment that he gave us, saying, I know this is what you need. So it's not just because it came from him, but because It's what our hearts are tied to and connected to. And so, and the other thing is, I've kind of been going through this journey ever since last summer of kind of continually being drawn back and going through this passage, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge me, and I will direct your paths. And he's just been continually just taking me through this verse and reminding me of it and re-reminding of it, and sometimes even just opening my eyes even a little bit more to a few things on that. And one of the things, two little things that I've sort of thought about that were new thoughts to me related to that, where when he says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Sometimes our own understanding of ourselves and our worthiness is based on Simon Peter and how he felt about his betrayal. And we look at our own lives and we sort of see the mess and we see some of the stuff that's in there, and we sort of say, do you know what? God can't use me. I'm not there. I'm too far away. I'm just all messed up. Do you know, it's like, so there's, and then I'm going to, so as a result of that, I'm just going to distance myself a little bit more from him. And it seems here, even in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, it's saying, don't lean on your own understanding. That's human thinking, and it's not human thinking. It's not thinking based on the grace and the mercy of God, and it's not human thinking based on the provision of Jesus in your life. Where he says, do you know what? It's like the sacrifice of my son was enough, and it covered your sin. And what are you trusting in or hoping in? Are you trusting in my life being better and me doing all the right things? Or in the midst of the honest look at our own lives, saying, do you know what? There's stuff that's messed up in here. But you know what? That's not where I'm looking. I am trusting in the Lord Jesus, who paid for all of my sin, who washed me clean, who his sacrifice was complete. And that's what I'm trusting in. And that's what I'm depending on. And that's where my hope is. And so in the midst of that, Lord Jesus, if you've got something for me, if you've got something that you want me to do, if you can use me in some way, here I am. I'm not going, pick me, I want to be there. I'm saying, if you can use me as I am, here I am, and I'm trusting in you, Jesus. And so there's a part of that even with our own thinking. It's like, not thinking according to our own thinking, but thinking according to what God says about us. And the other thing which I find is actually quite exciting, which I've even a couple of times put into practice, is what does this thing mean, in all your ways, acknowledge him. And I've had this sort of this little memory or picture in my mind when we used to drive around in the car as a family. My dad was a pastor, and so in our town, like, he'd know lots of people and things like that. And so, we'd be driving around and he'd see someone in the car, and he'd sort of wave. And if they waved back, it was great. But if they didn't wave back, it was like, I said, they didn't acknowledge me. They didn't acknowledge me. He said, I saw them, I waved, but they didn't acknowledge me. And so I've tried to take that little picture related to this passage where it says, in all your ways, acknowledge him. And it's this idea of Jesus is there. And he's going, hey, I'm over here. I'm in your life. I'm present. I'm right here. Recognize me. Acknowledge me. I'm here in your life. And it's like how we respond to that, could either be, it's like, oh, he's there, but not at the moment. No, there's stuff going on. No thanks. Or it's just this recognition of, you know what? Yes, he is in this situation. He is in this with me. It's like I'm not alone in this circumstance. I'm not alone in this. Acknowledging his presence in my life at the moment. Acknowledging that he is there. And so sometimes it's nearly just that recognition of its comfort. It's recognizing I'm not alone. This seems dark, it seems heavy, it seems lonely. It's like he is there in the midst of this. And he's saying, acknowledge me, I'm here. And sometimes it's also whenever we're struggling with temptation, and we're struggling with some things. And we're kind of thinking, I'm kind of thinking of acting this way. I'm kind of thinking of looking at that thing. And he's going, hey, acknowledge my presence. I'm here. We don't need to do this. I got something else for you. Okay? It's acknowledging his presence in all those aspects in our lives. In the areas that we feel we're being tempted in, it's recognizing he's there. He's there. Not there going, oi, don't be doing that. Going there, no, there's an alternative. I freed you from this. I am here. It's recognizing his presence in our lives. And so I find that to be very encouraging and something that continually, like as we're kind of just going through life, just trying to put that into practice, in my life. That whole thing of recognizing his presence in my life. It's like we head into the summer, and I look forward to the summer, at times with dread, at times with overwhelmment, at times with just not knowing how we're going to get through all of this. And yet the portraits of his faithfulness over the years have been, you always feel that way, Steve, and everything always works out. But recognize my presence. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Recognize that I am there. And so in each of our circumstances and situations, however different they are, whatever they are in our lives, just that encouragement. Recognize his presence in your life. Recognize his grace. Be honest with who you are related to him. Related to the first commandment, the greatest commandment, related to your love for him. And recognize that he wants to fulfill you, that he's got stuff for you to do. He's mostly concerned with our soft hearts and how we respond to him. And that aspect of knowing that in the process of our lives, that maybe he will just more consistently take us to those places, remind us of those places, when maybe, I'm on the throne and I need to get off the throne and I need to let Jesus get back onto the throne. I need to try to, surrender those things where I'm battling with my own will and trusting him and allowing his will to prevail in my own life. Loving the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and loving your neighbour as yourself. So just a wee challenge for you. I'm challenged by it. I sometimes think about, my neighbours. I have some neighbours who are really likeable and some neighbours who aren't. And some neighbours it's easy to go and spend time and do things for and things like that and sacrifice. And other neighbours, where it doesn't naturally be the way my brain's thinking. And yet God speaks in and says, and love your neighbour as yourself. Look at little ways of engaging in the people around you where he could make his presence known, where he could maybe soften hearts. And know that in the midst of stepping into those things and doing those things, maybe there's going to be more satisfaction and fulfillment that will happen in our lives too. Because God's commands for us are really for us. So let's just have a word of prayer. Father, I just thank you. Thank you that sometimes you just give us some simple things to focus on in Scripture and in your word. And yet the simple things are never easy. They're as difficult and hard as the more complex things because of our own hearts. But Father, I thank you. Thanks for the picture that you've just given us through Simon Peter. Who failed in such a big way, and yet how you responded to him was just so amazing. Father, I just pray that you would continue to work in our hearts, continue to open our eyes to see where the focus points are in our lives, and redirect us back to those places of just being your children with you on the throne, seeing how you want to act and interact in our lives and through our lives to those people that are around us. Thank you for what you've given us. Thank you that you've given us Jesus. And just continue to mold us into his image in our lives. Thanks that you want to bless, that you want to fulfill. Just meet us where we're at. So, and thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. So if the worshipy people want to come up, I think there's just one wee song.